Hello everyone, it's Phil here from the academic team. So today we're going to have a look at the second lesson in the fundamentals, following on from the previous one about different parts of speech, and today we're going to be looking at sentence structure. So in the previous lesson we'd had a look at what are phrases, what are clauses, what subjects are, objects, verbs, and in particular, we had a look at like independent clauses and dependent clauses, which are going to be really important for today. So if you haven't seen that lesson, go back, make sure you have a look at that first, because to understand how to make various complex sentences, you're going to have to know what an independent clause is and a dependent clause is. Okay, so let's get on with it. So today we're going to have a look at simple sentences, compound sentences, coordinating conjunctions, which is sometimes called fanboys, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences. The good thing about complex sentences is they're not actually that complex. So the name is scarier than they actually are. So let's start off having a look at simple sentences. So what is a simple sentence? So a simple sentence contains one independent clause, so one idea. So a simple sentence can have only one subject, or it can have multiple subjects. So we can have a look here. One subject, for example, Apple, the company, makes high-end computers. Okay, so this is a complete idea. This is a simple sentence. It is also an independent clause. They can have multiple subjects. Apple and Samsung have a large share of the smartphone market. So we see subjects here are highlighted in yellow. They do not require an object, so all objects are highlighted in blue here, as long as the sentence makes a complete thought. So we could say, for example, he studies. He studies as a complete thought. That is an independent clause. It is a simple sentence. They can have one or more objects. So you can say he studies maths, so we've got an object here, or he studies maths and science. So here we've got two objects. You can see we can have more. He studies maths, science, and history. So you can have 3, 4, 5. So multiple objects are possible, multiple subjects are possible. They can have one or more verbs. So he swims every day. Here we've just got one verb, or we can say he swims and runs. So now we've got two verbs. At school. Put me over here. They can contain prepositional phrases. So if you're wondering what prepositional phrases are, have a look at that previous lesson. For example, he studies maths and science on his own. So here we've got he is our subject, studies is our verb, maths and science, we've got two objects, and here we've got a prepositional phrase. So you can see we can make combinations of things. But they're all like one idea. Simple sentence can have a combination of all of the above. So here we've got rainforest and the ocean. So here we've got two subjects. Are, so that's our verb. Home to many interesting creatures. That's an object. And here we've got another verb. Are essential for maintaining our Earth's ecosystem. So here we've got another object. So we've got two subjects, two verbs, and two objects. You see, so a simple sentence can be quite complicated, but this is still a simple sentence. We know this part here isn't an independent clause by its own right because it doesn't have a subject. Okay, so when we've got this and it doesn't follow with a subject, when and is followed by a verb, is still part of the simple sentence. Okay, so moving on. So what is a compound sentence? So compound sentences when you start joining two simple sentences or two independent clauses. These independent clauses must be joined together by either a comma and a coordinated conjunction. So you'll see here, comma and. If you're worried about coordinated conjunctions, we're going to cover that in the next slide. I thought it would be easier to cover compound sentences first, and then we'll have a look at what the different conjunctions are. So there are three ways. We can be a comma, coordinating conjunction, and these conjunctions, as I said, sometimes referred to as fanboys, or by a semicolon. So here, instead of this, we could have the semicolon here, so it replaces the comma and, or we could just keep them as simple sentences and you could put a full stop and that would also work, but obviously it wouldn't be a compound sentence then if you put a full stop in the middle. So we've got to know both clauses have their own subjects. So let's have a look here at the example. Serious crimes have decreased over the period. So we've got serious crimes as a subject, have decreased, this is our verb. Over the period, this is a prepositional phrase. This is all one thought. Yep, it is an independent clause. We're using and because we're adding information, so we can have comma and now we have another subject, petty crimes have increased, and verb. Okay, so we've got an independent clause, we're joining them together with a comma and a coordinated conjunction. The other way you could do this, exactly the same meaning, serious crimes have decreased over the period, so this clause is exactly the same, and put the semicolon, petty crimes have increased, full stop. Okay. Both clauses have their own subject. So, if a clause does not have a subject, it is not an independent clause. Let's have a look at this. For example, Bitcoin has been unpredictable and very profitable for some people. So this first part is definitely an independent clause. We've got a subject, there's a verb, and a predicate. What's the object? We've got and, but after the and we see there is another predicate, but there's no subject. There's no verb. So we need a subject and a verb to make an independent clause. And we don't have it after the and. Therefore, this is not an independent clause, a compound sentence. So when you're joining together the independent clauses, we need a comma and an and, or a comma and a coordinated conjunction. But if you're joining together two clauses and the second clause or the first clause is not an independent clause, there's no comma. So here we see there's no comma before the and. So as I said here, the above sentence is not a compound sentence. There is only one subject, and therefore we do not need a comma before the and. So I've been mentioning these coordinating conjunctions. So what are coordinating conjunctions? I said they're often referred to as fanboys. The reason for this is fanboys is an easy pneumatic to remember them by. So the F, it means for. The A from here is and. The N is nor. B is but. O is or, yet, and so. The most common of these in your writing you're going to find is and, but, or, and so. These are the A, N, O, and S. The most common that is going to be most of your writing. Okay. So these coordinated conjunctions, they connect ideas of equal grammatical importance. In particular, you will hear us teachers referring to them in your corrections that you should be putting commas before them when you are connecting independent clauses. Because when you connect independent clauses with a coordinated conjunction, you create a compound sentence. So they're very, very essential and they affect your grammar. So like I said here, when they connect independent clauses, they should be preceded by a comma. Okay. You should not start a sentence with a coordinated conjunction. So in academic writing, you never want to start a sentence with like and or but or so or yet. Try and find a different conjunction. Like, for example, instead of using and, we could use moreover or additionally. Instead of using but, maybe we could use however. Instead of using so, we could use therefore. Okay, so these would be much better words to start sentences with. So avoid using these coordinating conjunctions to start a sentence. It is considered as grammatically poor writing, especially in academic writing. So your task 2 should never do that. So moving on to a complex sentence. A complex sentence joins at least one dependent clause and at least one independent clause to create a whole idea. Now, these are really, really important because in the rubric for your grammar, the writing rubric, it says to get above a band 5, you need to be correctly using complex sentences. So we obviously need to be using some complex sentences in your academic writing. It's very, very important to understand what they are, how to use them. Okay. So the dependent clause, remember, it does not make a whole idea. So let me think of we have an example here. Despite the cold weather. So if I just said despite the cold weather, I need some extra information. So this shows this as a dependent clause, whereas an independent clause is a whole thought. He went swimming. So if I wrote that on its own, it'd be fine. So to make this complex sentence, all I need to do is combine a dependent clause and an independent clause. You can put the independent clause first, or you can put the dependent clause first. It doesn't matter. It's up to you. However, if you put the dependent clause, highlighted in yellow here, first, you need to put a comma after it. Okay, so like the dependent clause are normally started with some form of conjunction, like despite or when or although. So whenever you've got one of these dependent clauses, we put comma, and then we put the independent clause, full stop. When the independent clause comes first, you're going to have, like here, he went swimming despite the cold weather. We don't put a comma. Okay, so remember, if the independent clause is first, the dependent clause is second, we don't put a comma. So this is why you'll find that quite often you'll have your teachers telling you don't put a comma before because starts a dependent clause. So if you're putting because in the middle of a sentence, that means that your dependent clause is coming after an independent clause, so there shouldn't be a comma. Same as like maybe you've got as, when you're using as to mean because. It would be exactly the same thing. Don't put the comma in front of it. Another example of a complex sentence that you probably already know is a conditional sentence, like if. If it rains, I will get wet. Okay, so this is also a complex sentence. You've got that if it rains, this is a dependent clause. After that if clause, you put a comma. I will get wet. The I will get wet is an independent clause, and that goes second. However, if you switch them around and you put I will get wet if it rains, now because we've got the independent clause coming first, there's no comma. Okay, so that's the comma rules. And that's a lot of understanding. This really helps with understanding the punctuation that you should be following in your essays. Now, what is a compound complex sentence? So as the name suggests, it is a mix between a compound sentence and a complex sentence. So if we remember, a compound sentence has two independent clauses or maybe more. So we could have 2 or 3 or 4 independent clauses, and a complex sentence has a dependent clause and an independent clause. So this means there has to be at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause for it to be a compound complex sentence. So let's have a look. For example, when the pandemic started. So this is a dependent clause. If I just said when the pandemic started on its own, it doesn't make sense. I need extra information. So we're going to follow this with an independent clause. When the pandemic started, comma, many people did not think it would affect them. Okay, so that alone, if we just put these two together, would be a complex sentence. But now I'm going to add another independent clause. So when I add the other independent clause, I use a fanboy. So we're highlighting these fanboys in green here. So we've got the fanboy, the coordinated conjunction, and the comma. So many people did not think it would affect them. So, and we use so because we're giving a result. They didn't take it seriously. So they didn't take it seriously. If you write it on its own, you see it's an independent sentence. It makes sense on its own. So here we've joined one dependent clause with 2 independent clauses which are joined together with a coordinated conjunction. This is a compound complex sentence. So make sure to use punctuation in these sentences so as not to confuse the reader. When you start using all these different clauses and adding them together, your punctuation has to be really good, because when you stop putting the punctuation where it should be, a native speaker gets really confused as to what clause is coming next and the meaning. So like with these compound complex sentences, punctuation is really, really important. So you'll notice that the compound sentence above contains a coordinated conjunction preceded by a comma, as usual. Now, in the following example, notice how the punctuation changes if a clause order changes. So here, the meaning is going to be exactly the same. We've got exactly the same clauses, but I'm just going to put them in a slightly different order. So now we've got the compound sentence first. Many people did not think it would affect them, comma, so they didn't take it seriously when the pandemic started. So now we've got the dependent clause at the end. There should be no comma, because remember when we put independent clause followed by a dependent clause, there's no comma. Okay. Now the next point is something I really want to point out. I see this in a lot of the corrections that we mark, and a very, very common mistake of students. They end up making incredibly long compound complex sentences. I marked an essay the other day where the entire paragraph was just one sentence. It was a very long paragraph. This makes it close to impossible for the reader to understand what you're saying. It is very difficult to get the grammar and the punctuation correct if you're going over 4 clauses. So I would say an absolute maximum for any sentence should be 4 clauses. So even if you're making a compound complex sentence, that's great, but don't make it any longer than 4 clauses. And honestly, 3 clauses are absolutely fine. This is about as complex as a sentence needs to get. Anything after that, use a full stop. It makes it easier for you because you kind of reset the grammar. So the things that join together are much easier to understand. And it makes it much, much easier for the reader. And this is something you should always bear in mind when writing. The important person is the reader. It's not the writer. You're not trying to show off. You're trying to communicate, and you're trying to make the reader's job very easy. That's why, again, you'll hear a lot of your teachers saying, stop trying to use overly complex vocabulary, because it doesn't help communicate. What helps you communicate is using accurate vocabulary clearly. So while we need to have some level of complex sentence, all the rubric says is you need complex sentences. So you don't even need these compound complex sentences to get high marks. You just need a complex sentence. So you need to be joining dependent clauses to independent clauses. And that is all you need to be doing on your sentence structure to be getting bands 8s and bands 9s. There's no other stipulation in the rubric to say that you need anything more. So like making overly complex sentences is making your life difficult, and it's making the reader's life difficult. Anytime the examiner is sat there going, what is the student trying to say? You've reduced the clarity of your writing from trying to be too complex, and that is going to reduce your grammar score, not increase it. So like I said, keep it to an absolute maximum of 4 clauses. Really, I think 3 clauses is absolutely sufficient for any sentence that you make. Okay, so come back. What we covered in this lesson was simple sentences. So remember, they can have one or multiple subjects. They can have one or multiple verbs. They don't need an object, but they can have an object, and they can have multiple objects. Compound sentences. Remember, they are 2 independent clauses, 2 complete thoughts being joined together either with a comma and a coordinated conjunction or a semicolon. We had a look at what the coordinated conjunctions are. We've got for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so, and we'll use them with a comma to join these compound sentences. Complex sentences, these are when we are adding a dependent and independent clause together to make a complete thought. And a compound and complex sentence is when we have at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause. Okay, so I hope that clarified sentence structure for you a bit. As I said, if some of that was confusing, make sure you've watched the previous lesson on parts of speech, as that kind of breaks it down. And these are the building blocks of English. Once you understand like the parts of speech and sentence structure, then it's quite mathematical. For any of you that have got quite a mathematical brain like me, I found that was really helpful in understanding how English went together. Rather than go, oh, it's grammar and it's like linguistical ideas. It's really like mathematical shapes being put together. So it's like building blocks. And once you understand what those building blocks are, you should start to write grammatically accurate sentences. So good luck with all your studies. Thank you very much for tuning in, and stay safe out there.